Hello and welcome back. Now that we are learning Spark, it is very important that we understand the importance of NoSQL databases. Today, we are going to explore Azure Cosmos DB. Cosmos DB is one of the popular offerings from Azure Cloud. Today, we will see what is a NoSQL database. Why is Cosmos DB so popular? We will try to understand the basics of Cosmos DB. We will set up Cosmos DB in our Azure cloud environment and we will try to read and write data from Cosmos DB utilizing Spark. Now, this video is an end-to-end video. We'll start by learning the basics of Azure Cosmos DB till the end, how to load and write data using Spark. So please make sure that you watch this video till the end. Now, if you have not seen our previous video, I would recommend you to go back and watch our playlist from the beginning. So without any delay, let's begin. Now, before we can go ahead and learn about Cosmos DB, it is very important to understand the basic difference between a NoSQL and a SQL database. First and the foremost difference is the NoSQL databases do not have any fixed scheme. But wherever in a traditional SQL database, we have a fixed scheme. Now, the NoSQL databases majorly focuses on scaling out. It means horizontal scaling. Whereas the traditional SQL databases majorly focus on scaling up. It means vertical scaling. Now, NoSQL databases also support variety of data. It means it can support all structured, unstructured or semi-structured of data. But SQL databases generally supports majorly structured data. And this is some of the important reasons why NoSQL databases are so much of demand nowadays. It is very important that you learn at least one NoSQL databases while working with Spark. And today we will see that with Cosmos DB. Now, to understand Cosmos DB, consider it as a hub. Cosmos DB itself supports multiple APIs. Four of the major APIs are listed here. You can see NoSQL databases, graph databases, key value, and Postgres. Now, out of this, you can see Cosmos DB also supports NoSQL databases. It also supports graph databases like Gremlin. It supports key value stores as well. And it also supports structured data as Postgres. So you can consider Cosmos DB as a hub with multiple API supports. And we will see this in few minutes when we start with our demo. The popularity of Cosmos DB starts with it supports ACID transactions. When we talk about ACID transactions, it was the fundamentals when the databases were built. It supports atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. So all the four ACID properties are supported by Cosmos DB. And the benefit comes into picture with Cosmos DB being highly distributed and concurrent in nature. Now, how Cosmos DB supports its highly distributed and concurrent nature? It's with two factors. The first one is replication and the second one is partition. For replication, it replicates the data in two ways. First one is local and the second one is geo. In local case, it copies the data in 4 instances in order to make sure your data is never lost and it is fault tolerant. But if you want to make your data available throughout the globe, you can use the geo replication method. In that case, your data will be highly available. Now, coming back to partition. Cosmos DB generally partitions your data in two fashions. The first one is physical and the second one is logical. The first one is physical means your data will reside actually at some data centers in the cloud. But logical partition is something that we will define with the help of a partition key to make sure that our data is distributed properly across the cluster nodes and it can be processed parallelly. And this is the reason why partition key is a very important factor in Cosmos DB. Now, Cosmos DB is designed in a very simple fashion. The first one is database. Database is as similar as our databases in SQL. Now, inside the database, we have containers. Now, you can assume containers as tables for your traditional SQL systems. Now, inside containers, you can have items. And these are the things which separate NoSQL from SQL. Items can be anything. It can be a key value pair. It can be a JSON payload. It can be a document. It can be a semi-structured data. It can be an unstructured data. And we need to define two important things for each of the item. The first one is ID, which would be the unique key. It can be a combination of one or more columns. And the second one is the partition key, which will distribute your data logically. So if we try to compare it with a simple SQL system, so database remains database, containers are your tables, and items are your records. Okay, now that we understand the basics of Cosmos DB, let's go ahead and create one of the instances of Cosmos DB in our Azure cloud. Now, in order to set up Cosmos DB, you first need to log in into your Azure account. Once you are logged in into your Azure account, you just need to search Cosmos DB from the search bar. You just need to type Cosmos and it will give you the option. Just click on Azure Cosmos DB. Once you are here, you can see a message displayed here. It says you will get some of the free units if you are within the free tier. So you can see it says 20k RUs. RUs are request units that Azure utilizes in order to bill you for Azure Cosmos. Now, whenever you read or write data, some of the RUs, which is the request unit, is consumed. And based on that, Azure will bill you for Azure Cosmos DB. Now, if you are well within the limits, there will be no charge in your Azure account. So let's go ahead and click on Create Azure Cosmos DB account. Great. Now you can see all the APIs that Cosmos DB offers. It starts with NoSQL. You can see Postgres, MongoDB, Gremlin, DB for table, and Apache Cassandra. For today's example, we are going to use NoSQL API. So I'll just click on create. Great. Once we are inside the create page, first we need to define the resource group. I'll click on create new and I'll just type is with data Cosmos and I'll click on OK. This will create a new resource group. Now I need to provide an account name. I'll just type is with data Cosmos DB. Great, it validated and I can use this name. Now I'll not change anything else. I'll let it be whatever the default setting is, which says availability zones, location, capacity mode, and everything. Now if you see a message here, it says the first 1000 RUs and 25 GB is free for the free tier account. So we'll click on the apply, which is by default for apply free tier. So you'll be not charged anything if you utilize only 1000 RUs and up to 25 GB of Azure Cosmos DB space. So we'll just click on global distribution next. I'll not change anything here. I'll click on networking. No changes here. I'll click on backup policy. No changes here. I'll click off encryption. No changes here. Click on tags. Nothing to change. Click on review and create. Great. No errors here. The validation is success. And let's go ahead and click on create. It will take some time in order to create your Azure Cosmos DB. Let's wait for it to complete. Great. Our Azure Cosmos DB is provisioned. Click on go to resource. Awesome. This is our Azure Cosmos DB platform. Now, in order to see the data, you just need to go to the Data Explorer. Now, once the Data Explorer is open, you can see there is nothing in our Azure Cosmos DB. So the first thing is we first need to create a container. In order to do it, you click on new container. So in order to have a container, we first need to define a database. So I'll keep the database name as is with data. Great. I'll keep the throughput as manual because we don't want to charge ourselves, right? So I'll make it manual and I'll keep the request unit maximum as 400. Now, next step is to define the container ID. Now, since we were working with device data, I'll just type device data as my container. Now, the next step is to define a partition key. Now, if you remember our payload for device, which looks something like this, so we can define the customer ID as our partition key. So in order to distribute our data based on customer ID, we'll just copy customer ID from here. We'll come back to our Azure portal. We will put a slash and customer ID here. So our partition key will be based on customer ID. Next, we need to define unique keys. Now, unique key can be a combination of one or more keys. But in our payload, we already have event ID, which is basically an unique key. So I'll just copy this. As usual, I'll put a slash and I'll put unique key as event ID. Now, suppose if you want to put anything else which is nested, you can put one more slash and define the name of that column. For me, it's event ID. So I'll keep it as event ID. Now, this is my unique key. Now, you can have the combination of more than one unique key for a particular container. Next, I'll not do anything and I'll just click on OK. Awesome. Now, if you see on the left side, you will see our database is with data. If I expand this, you will see the container device data, which is basically the table for us. So if I expand this, right now, there are no items. It means it does not have any record that has been stored. So let's go ahead and create our first item. So I'll click on this and then I'll click on new item. Now you will see a JSON payload here, right? So we have our device data payload. Let's just copy and paste it here. So I'll copy my device data payload and I'll paste it here. So once we have pasted our device data payload, let's click on save. Nice. If I expand it to the right, you can see the customer ID has been used as the partition key and you can see the ID, which is the unique key that we have defined, is the event ID. Now, if I scroll down in this payload, you can see some of the columns that has been added by Cosmos in order to make sure that it maintains the audit properties. Now, Cosmos by default copies and creates a unique ID, which is named as ID, which will contain the data, whatever you have defined as ID. So in our case, event ID has been copied as ID. Now you can see some underscore columns, which are the audit columns that has been added by Azure for its purpose. So you can see we have added an item here. We can go ahead and add more items. So let's go ahead and add one more. So I'll click on new item and I'll copy the device data from my sheet. I'll just copy one of the device data here and I'll paste it here and I'll click on save. Great. Now if you see, the structure for this payload is different. We do not have anything inside the devices, whereas the structure for the previous payload has some of the data inside this. So here the structure of your data itself is different. And still, the Cosmos DB is supporting both the payload structure. And this is the beauty of NoSQL databases. You can have different structures for the same container. So each of the structure would be saved as a different item. Great. Now that our setup for Azure DB is complete, let's go ahead and use Spark in order to read and write the data. Now, in order to work with Cosmos DB in Spark, the first and foremost thing is you need to import the required jars. For this, we have utilized, you can see com.azure.cosmos.spark, and it utilizes a version 4.5.0. So we have imported this using the help of our spark.jars.packages in our Spark session. So let's go ahead and run our Spark session. There is no change for the other attributes in our Spark session. So let me go ahead and run this. So our Spark session is up and running. Spark has already imported all the required jars in order to make sure it can work with Cosmos DB. Now, the next important step is, in order to work with Cosmos DB, we first need to connect with Cosmos DB. So we need to define some of the configurations to make sure that we work with it. So the first config is spark.cosmos.account endpoint. It is the endpoint of your Cosmos DB. You can find this information in your Azure portal. So once you are back in your Azure DB Cosmos portal, on the left hand side, you just need to scroll down to keys. Click on keys. And here you can see the URI. Now, a word of caution here. Anything that you see on the screen is sensitive. It means this needs to be a secret. You don't need to share this with anyone. If someone gets access to your keys, they can very well access to your Cosmos DB account. But I'll show this to you today, and I'll automatically rotate my keys and remove them from my Azure account in order to make sure that you're not able to access my Cosmos DB. So even if you try to use my key and access my Cosmos DB, you'll not be able to do it. But let's go ahead and first put the endpoint. So I'll just copy this URI, and this would be my Cosmos DB endpoint. So I'll paste it here. Great. Now we need an account key. You can see spark.cosmos.account key. Let's go ahead back to our keys, and you can see primary key and secondary key. You can just copy any one of them. So I'll copy the primary key. I'll click on that show button, and you can copy this key from here, and you can paste the secret key here. We are almost done with the security settings. Next is the database. So our database is same, which is ease with data, and our data container is device data. So I'll just rename it to device data. Great. Our config is ready. Now, you might be thinking it's not a good idea in order to put your secrets like account key and endpoint in a script. That's correct. In the end of this course, we will see how we can hide this information and make sure that that is not written in our script. That we will do in the end. Before that, let's go ahead and read and write data from Cosmos. So in order to read the data, let's go ahead and create our data frame df. So to read the data, I'll just write spark.read.format. Now, the format for Cosmos DB would be cosmos.oltp. We need to define some options in order to read the data. So I'll put options, and these options would be the config properties like account endpoint, account key, database name, and container. So I'll just copy the config and I'll expand it here. So I'll put double star and I'll put config. Now, since we are reading JSON data, so we want to infer the schema while reading. So we'll put that also in the option. So I'll write option spark.cosmos.read.infer schema enabled as true. So it will read by default the schema of the JSON payload that we have saved as items in our Cosmos DB. Now we just need to put load. I'll close the brackets, and before we run this, let's go ahead and run our config, and then we run our data frame query. Great, our data frame query is complete. Let's go ahead and see the scheme. So I'll run the print schema. Nice. You can see it is reading the structure from the Cosmos DB. Now, if you want to see data, you just need to write df.show. So I'll run this. Great. Now you can see the data for both the items that we have saved in our Cosmos DB. You can see both the data here and all of the columns that we are reading from Cosmos. Now, if you are seeing, we are reading the ID and event ID both from the Cosmos, because this ID has been added by Cosmos DB in order to make each of the payload unique. Now, we have read the data from Cosmos DB. Let's go ahead and write a data in Cosmos DB. So I have some device data payloads here. So if I open this, you can see the device data JSONs here. Let's go ahead and write this JSON as items in my container. So in order to do that, I'll read that JSON first in form of JSON. So I'm writing a df as df read spark.read.json and the JSON file, which is the device03 JSON file. Okay, let me show you the data first. So I'll run this. Great, you can see the data, right? We are going to write this data in Cosmos now. Now, in order to write the data, first we need to add the unique key column, which is the ID. Since we don't have the ID column here, we need to create it. So I'll create that column. So I'll write df.read.with column. I'll create the new column, which is ID, from the column which is event ID, because our event ID is the ID column, right? So this is our with column. Now that we have created our event ID, we need to specify the format, which is dot format, which is again cosmos.oldb, and we need to specify the configs for loading the data. So we'll write options, which is again the same config. So I'll write star star config, because we are writing to the same database, same container, using the same account name and secret, right? And we need to add one more option here. This is important. There are multiple write strategies available for Cosmos DB. It means it can update the same item, it can delete the item, it can overwrite the item, it can append the item, it can patch the item. If you see this Git documentation, it provides you the different writing strategy that Cosmos gives you. So it is item overwrite, item append, item overwrite if not modified, delete, delete if not modified, item patch. There are multiple writing strategies. So in order to write the items properly, you need to define the write strategy. Since we are going to append an item, we'll just copy this write strategy from here. So I'll write option and I'll specify the write strategy as item append. Because we are going to append an item, we are not going to change anything. In order to make sure we are not overwriting our container, we need to specify the mode, which would be append. And in the end, we will write save. Now, you might be thinking, what is this item append and what is this append? Now, you just need to see this option is the right strategy at the item level. And this option is for at the container level. So if you want to append the data in the container, you just need to use append. Because we have already created that container, we are going to append the item. So we'll use the mode as append. But if you want to do something on the item level, for example, if you want to delete or patch an item, you need to use the correct write strategy for that item. Right now, we are just going to append the data. So I'll use item append. So let me go ahead and run this. Awesome. This is complete, right? So you can see this ID is 1450. Let me go back to my Azure portal. Okay, I'm back in my Azure portal, right? So let me go ahead and refresh. Here is the third item that we have just written. So you can see this item here. So let me expand this and you can see the items here. Here is the complete item. So consider a case if you want to update the same item. So if you have this item and you want to update some data, you need to use the item patch. So just make sure you check this timestamp here. So we'll just try to overwrite this data. So I'll just go back and I'll change this as overwrite. And if I run this again, it is complete. Let me go back. So if you see it is 1114, let me refresh. If I go back and open this, you can see it is 1179. So this data has been overwritten. So in the same way, you can delete the item as well. So consider you want to delete this item. Let's go ahead and change it to item delete. And let's run this. It is complete. Let me go back and refresh it here. See, the item is gone. So now you understand how you can manipulate the items from Spark very well. Now, coming back to the secret settings. Now, you don't want to keep your account endpoint and account key secret in the script. You want to make sure that these are hidden from the developers. So in order to do this, you need to keep them in the Spark default setting. So to do that, let me go back to my Spark install. So my Spark installation is at user local Spark. So I'll click enter and I'll just type LL. You can see here conf folder, right? Just go into that conf folder and put a LL and you can see the Spark defaults, right? Right now it's a template, it is not being used. Let's go ahead and change this. So I'll just copy the name here. I'll write move and I'll paste it here. And again, I'll remove the template from the end. So I don't have permission. So let me put sudo in the same command. Sudo. Okay. Now this is done. So if I put this, you see the name has been renamed. Let's go ahead and add the setting there. So I'll just put sudo nano and I'll write this file. So copy this, I'll paste it here. I'll hit enter. And let me go back and copy this setting. So I'll copy this endpoint here. I'll come in the bottom. I'll paste it here. I'll put a tab, then go back. Copy this setting from here. Paste it here. Come back. Copy the account key. Paste it here. I'll put a tab. And copy the secret. So I'll copy this. I'll paste it here. I'll just save this and I'll exit. Great. Our Spark default has been changed. Now, in order to load the Spark default, we need to restart our Spark session. So I'll just go to the kernel and I'll click on restart and clear all outputs. So I'll do a restart quickly. Great, I've restarted. Now I have to remove this config, right? This is no longer required to be kept in the script. So I'll remove this and I'll go ahead and run my Spark session. Once I run my Spark session, the Spark default settings will automatically be loaded into the Spark session. So our account settings and the secrets are now available in the Spark session itself. So I don't need to specify in config. So I'll just go ahead and specify the database and the container name. So I'll run this, and now we'll read the data from the Cosmos. So I'll run this. Now I'll run the print schema. You can see the schema, and if I run the show, you can very well see both the data is reading from Cosmos, right? So our Spark's default setting has been picked up automatically, and now you don't have the secrets in the script. And this is the way how production code is being implemented for Cosmos. So you don't need to keep your secrets in the script. You can very well keep them in Spark default configuration so that the developers don't have access to the secrets. Great. Now we have completed the end-to-end implementation for Cosmos DB. I hope you have learned some basics about Cosmos DB and how to utilize Cosmos DB with Spark. Now, before I wrap up this session, let me go ahead and show you how to rotate your keys in order to make sure no one else accesses your Cosmos DB. So I'll go back to my Azure portal. I'll go to keys. Now, since I have already shown you my primary key, I'll click on this button in order to rotate the key. So once our rotation about the keys are complete, no one else can use our old key in order to access our Cosmos DB. And this is how our Cosmos DB is safe. And this was all for today. If you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. Till then, keep learning, keep sharing, keep growing.